Hey, yo, what it did, y'all? Let's get right into it. So, he gave us a lot of information these past couple of days, and still a lot going on up here, but my mind is running in circles. I found a way to process a lot of the crafting information in particular, and it's because I need to paint a new picture for crafting. I need to start preparing my mind, so that's you guys' your minds, for what crafting is going to look like in PoE 2, because from what they've described, the crafting experience is going to be very different from what we know currently. The currencies might share the similar name, and some of them have the same function, but the removal or changes to pre-existing currencies is going to change how we actually interact with the system. And so it's time to take a look at that new method of interaction, how it solves problems that we had previously. Does it solve all of those problems? Does it potentially even open up new problems that we should be looking into? So that's what I want to dive into today. Now, you know the deal. If you rock with the videos, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Mostly comments. I want to hear thoughts, especially about these crafting topics. I just like to see what people are thinking about crafting going in, so that I know what to be keeping my eye out for when I am making a reflection on this after we have early access, right? Now, first thing we have to talk about is definitely the availability of the crafting materials. That was one of the things that stood out to me the most, probably the most important thing that I heard. And it's just because crafting materials in PoE 1, because of the way the system was designed, had the currencies that I would say align more naturally with what people would call crafting on average. They were turbo rare. I'm talking about Exalt, I'm talking about Regals, even to a degree like Annuls or things like that, like just currencies that actually have more, quote, controlled outcomes were pretty hard to come by. And that's something that's changed in PoE 2. A quote from the Q&A is that if people aren't feeling compelled to use Exalt in Act 1, they failed. This is referring to them going through different alpha builds before, giving it to us. And that was something that they were keeping an active eye on, which I think is really cool, actually. Especially just because it's going to be a dopamine hit like a motherfucker to be a PoE 1 player, see Exalt drop in Act 1 and go, oh, right? Like that's going to be a dope hit of dopamine. And it also means that like it's something that we should be using. There's one other cool change in this currency availability thing that is worth noting, and it's that we now get rarity to affect currency drops. This being relevant to say like rares and bosses that have, improved rarity on the things that they drop, and therefore theoretically, according to them, they should be dropping more of those rare currencies to play around with. And this is important to talk about first because it kind of sets the scene for how we will be crafting going forward, at least in terms of what we expect to have availability of. Now, it's worth noting, of course, this is information from their internal testing. What we might expect when we get in there, or what we might like when we get in there, obviously may be different. So it's just, thinking about what they've told us relative to what we know, right? Now that I've talked about the currency shifted a little bit, we have to talk about the change in the crafting system, like the loop, quote unquote. Like, what does it actually look like if you make an item? And what I gathered is that you're looking for a base. The base might already have pre-existing mods on it that you want, so you might skip a step or two in this flow. But the general flow seems to be, at the very least, you get like, let's say you're looking for a really specific crossbow base because it gives you like, there's a crossbow that gave grenades +1 proj. So maybe you want that specific base. Then you transmute it, aug it, regal it, exalt it. And then, if it has sockets, which a crossbow should have 2 sockets, I believe, at a certain point in the game, you will then be able to socket that for further stats. And now, this is an interesting system because the design of it, the way they talk about it, it's meant to solve a problem, a very specific problem, actually, and one that I think we will all feel right at home with. Gambling. One of the things that they talk about is that the fact that this new system takes the emphasis out of what they call foraging, right? If you're familiar with Harvest, right? Which if we're all PoE1 players here, you're definitely familiar with Harvest. Reforge is the term for just straight up scrapping the item and re-rolling it. It is also what Chaos Orbs did. It's what Alterations did to blue items, right? And Scouring Orbs allowed you to remove everything so that you could then put everything back on it through alchemy, orbs of alchemy, or orbs of transmutation, or essences, right? There are all these reforging systems in the past, right, that don't exist anymore in one way or another. Scours and alterations are gone. Scours were confirmed here to be gone, and alterations were confirmed in Exalcon to be gone. And then we have chaos that only reforge one stat on the item, and essences only slam on one stat onto the item now, right? So at least from what we know about essences, by the way, there might be more essences that we haven't seen yet, who knows? But that information tells us that we no longer are going to be pulling the slot machine, let's go gambling, if you will, on our items that we're crafting. And that's very, very different from how we currently craft. And I would argue that it's going to feel better. Now, I don't know for sure, right? I haven't played it, but it's something to think about in the sense that that's one of the community's, like as a whole, me included, quite frankly, biggest complaints with the crafting system in PoE 1 is that to a certain degree, it just feels like you are deleting currency, gambling on repeat, hoping that something comes up. And I have another thought about this later, but we have to talk about some other things in the crafting before I hit the other half of this. Is the gambling problem actually going to be solved part of this process? Next up though, because there's a lot of aspects to our crafting system in PoE 1, right? Like ignoring, for a second, take a moment, ignore the league mechanics that we have, right? Like there are so many league mechanics that interact with crafting, but right now I want to talk about it. We're talking mostly about the base features, because a lot of the league mechanics just kind of, get baked into how they designed new crafting. They said this even back in ExileCon 2019 when they, announced PoE 2, and then a little bit later on, a couple months, like 6 months later, when they announced Harvest and whatnot, they said that they were going to be openly experimenting with things that they were going to implement or look into implementing into PoE 2's crafting system. So I'm ignoring league mechanics for a lot of this discussion, but one of the core things that they've said is gone is the crafting bench. And that, don't panic. If you heard that and you're like, hey, yo, what the fuck? No. It's not that bad. It makes sense. The way that they describe it, I'm willing to try it before I say anything about it. It's going to sound weird at first, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Specifically, they talk about the crafting bench having 3 purposes in PoE 1, which, I've never thought about it in this particular way, but when you break it down this way, especially now if you think about the new implementations of these 3 things, it actually makes a lot of sense. You were to use it to customize your items or character to get special stats, you use it to solve problems with your character, and you use it to metacraft items. So the customization refers to things such as veiled modifiers, especially, right? If you're thinking about I'm looking for freeze immunity, that's technically a problem solving thing, but it's also a special stat that comes from veiled orbs. Or, you're looking for the min charges, that's a veiled orb craft. Or, the AoE that you get on amulet, or the +1 melee range, or the +1 pierce, right? These are all stat customization options that came from the crafting bench, and they've moved this function primarily to the soul cores. Those things that get socketed that you get from, the Trial of Chaos, right? They've moved that function there. Then they remove the other part of the bench, the problem solving, also to the socket system, but via the runes and the problem solving. It's why when they showed us the runes, some of the ones we saw said resistances on your armor, right? Using them to solve basic gearing problems. I need a little bit more resistances. I need more armor. I need more energy shield, right? Who knows the variety of runes in full, right? I'm hoping that they, since that's the designed intent is to replace the crafting bench in that regard, I'm hoping that they did make sure that there's a wide array of needed fixing stats, and it's not just resistances. It'll be resistances, life, maybe on weapons we'll be able to get attack speed as a fixing stat, right? Who knows? We'll have to see what comes up, but the design idea is there. We'll still be able to have something akin to the crafting bench for fixing these problems, but it just won't be the crafting bench, right? And 3, least important, right? Because I think the most important was the problem solving aspect, because imagine we find out that we don't have the ability to fix our resistances. This was a problem we had in Endless Delve, right? That was one of the complaints was ooh, I don't like that I can't fix my res down here. It's cringe. But now, the third thing is metacrafting. And that's solved by omens. right? We still have ways to control or give further levels of control to the outcomes of our crafting currencies, especially relevant when we talk about exalts, annuls, maybe even regals, and the essences have that in there. Probably chaos might be affected by some omens. That's going to be really cool, and so we'll still have that method. It just won't be through the bench, right? And the major reason that I'm willing to give this so much credence and experimentation value is specifically because it decouples actual crafting currency from static uses of said crafting currency. This was always one of my biggest complaints with Exalts and Divines historically. When we got the Exalt to Divine change, I want to say that was in the Scourge League. I'm misremembering off the top of my head. But when we got that change, my biggest comment on it was not, oh my God, we don't have Divine cards like we have Exalt cards. What the fuck, GGG, right? It was, now we go from using a Divines willy-nilly and like holding on to our exalts to using our exalts willy-nilly and holding on to our divines. And it's worth noting, I don't think either one of them feels particularly notably better than the other. It was really fun getting to finally just like free slam random shit, right? Oh, I've got a cluster jewel that looks half decent. Bam! +1 exalt on it, right? Like that was cool, but I lost the ability to drop a unique and go, fuck it, divine that hoe, right? Or drop it, I'm crafting an item and I get this really nice weapon, but it low rolls, fuck it, divine that hoe, right? Like that cost went so far up because of the fact that that currency was also tied to meta crafting, right? You were like, man, if I want to use these divines, but people are paying so much for my divines, or exalts if you go further back, people are paying so much for my divines and exalts just to control their crafting. That being decoupled is massive, and it like that applies in meta crafting, but it works its way down the train, right? In leveling, for example, one of the big things is not burning your transmutations too willy-nilly, because you might need them to use one at a time on fixing resistances. Same for alterations if you need more life on, right? Or you might need to hold enough, I believe it's alterations, to craft attack speed on your axe, right? These were all like little problems that you don't think impacted you all that much until you look at it all the way around. And I'm very happy to see this being addressed, right? That's like actually like by far the most positive change I heard about crafting, the one that I'm like the most excited about. But you see, now that I've talked about the thing I'm excited about, I have to give my concerns, because I mentioned that I wasn't fully sure if this was going to solve the problem, right? And it's because, to an extent, we did not get rid of fail states in crafting, and that's not my complaint. I like fail states existing. I just think this fail states need to exist in a certain way, right? And specifically, there's a system they haven't given me enough detail about to be confident in its ability to solve this last problem. I mentioned the previous video where I talked about affixes in PoE 1. And the short version of that video, I do, again, recommend watching it if you haven't. It is it's actually one of my favorite topics I've got to talk about on this channel. But specifically, I do not know if this is going to solve the problem of having useless affixes on gear, right? Like talking about like resistances on my weapon type shit, right? Especially considering like it's interesting, we can't use runes for resistances on our weapon. So I'm hoping that means that we don't roll resistances on our weapons anymore. But again, can't really confirm or deny that until I get to see more about it, right? But that has not been confirmed to me if the modifier pool by slot is more generally useful. And this system they talk about, they mentioned it back at XLCon. I remember there's an interview that was done with Lance and Jonathan where they talk about this base tiers system. The idea being that, a tier 2 version of a scepter has a more limited pool in terms of like, lower values than a tier 5 version of said scepter. The same way you can get like gems that are pre-leveled and whatnot, right? Like it's in that vein. And what I want to know is, does that tiering system only move the ceiling up? Or is there a point as we get higher and higher up that the floor will also get brought up? This is a really big deal to me. Somebody commented that on my video actually about like the fact that a system like that would actually do wonders, and it made so much sense to me. In other words, how often am I going to get trolled by crafting, right? Because it's cool if you give me the ability to use these crafting currencies and to make the system less feel like less like a gambling system, right? But if my average likelihood of still getting screwed anyways is just more frequent, and now I just have to go get a new base each time, but I'm still getting screwed all the time, then we haven't really solved that problem. We've just relocated it. And that's my biggest concern. I don't think, like, I'm not saying it any way that I think they're going to bung this up or anything. It's just one of those things where it's like, it's a concern of mine that is already documented that I hadn't seen or heard addressed appropriately. And if I missed something throughout the Q&A, was long, and I know I was getting kind of sleepy through both my watch throughs of it, so maybe I missed something. And if I did, please let me know in the comments that I'm just bugging, so I can be like, guys, we're saved. But I didn't hear anything that addresses this concern, and it's something that I definitely feel like could weigh down the otherwise massive upsides of the new system that they've introduced to us, right? Anyways, I think that hits all of my thoughts, right? I think the new sequence is actually a really cool idea. Specifically, I'm very fascinated by the removal of the reforging systems in the game. I just think that was a really cool decision. The removal of the feeling of gambling, at least, or reduction in the feeling of gambling, is definitely going to do a lot for our mentality approaching crafting. I'm really looking forward to slamming an exalt on something in Act 1. So I hope GGG knows I will be complaining if I don't get to exalt something in Act 1. And otherwise, I'm very much looking forward to these system changes and looking forward to learning more about this system, and both through the teasers that we're going to get between now and early access release, but especially in early access. It's going to be really fun getting to actually play around with the system and see how you can optimize the crafting to continue to get the high level results that we want when we are crafting items. If you have any additional thoughts, drop those in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to see me elsewhere, Twitch, Discord, both in the description. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.